Welcome, everybody. Again, I'm Lisa. That's John. It's so great to see you. Even though I can't see all of you, it's great. It's great for you to be here. We can't wait till we can do this in person again. But for the meantime, thank you for enduring another Zoom meeting. I'm sure it's not your first of the day, but we're always excited to have you here, and we're super grateful to Opsani for once again sponsoring our, well, I'll call it beer and pizza, our virtual snacks. So there is a link in the chat that you can sign up for and we will give you a DoorDash certificate. And I believe, Cassidy, are you doing this kind of in real time, or last time it was like, give us 24 hours and
yeah, I'm doing it in real time, but it might take 24 hours to be delivered, just depending on Amazon. So
I see. Okay. I think it came pretty much right away last time, which was super cool. Thank you for that. I believe I ordered sushi. So, which is something we always got a request for at meetups. We were like, yes, we would all love sushi, but we need to have 20 sponsors for that. So thank you, Cassidy. And just for everybody who doesn't know about Opsani, next meetup, we will have Opsani presenting, which will be very cool. So, John, do you have anything to add?
I think you kind of covered it.
Okay. Hi, Tony. Oh my gosh, it's so great to have the familiar faces. Thanks for joining us. And Tony, we're going to have to repost the link in chat for you to get your DoorDash gift certificate. So we'll keep reiterating that throughout, but I don't want to keep interrupting Tiffany after she has started. So stay safe, everybody. Go get those shots in the arm. And with that, I will hand it over to Tiffany.
There's the unmute button. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, John, for hosting this meetup and inviting me. It's really awesome to see you all here. I love dev meetups because we just get to chill and talk about tech things and get to talk about things that we normally wouldn't in conferences. For me, it's fun because it's more of a two-way communication street. So feel free to ask any questions. If you want to jump in and add to the conversation, feel free to. This topic is on governance, risk, and compliance. So basically all things IT governance. And I'm sharing it from the perspective of, well, how do you automate this process through CI/CD? And so I hope this session is really helpful. I'm a little bit more about myself. My name is Tiffany Jakja. I'm a technical evangelist at a company called Harness. We help everyone simplify and scale their software delivery. So if you want to know more about us, just head on over to harness.io. But again, this session is more of an educational one about governance. And I think it's really timely, especially because of so many supply chain and data breach hacks as of late. If you all heard on the news, the East Coast currently has a gasoline shortage because of some ransomware that occurred. So that's always fun. But a really, really big one that happened last year was the SolarWinds hack of 2020. And if you don't know a lot about the details of it, essentially a lot of CI/CD solutions and solutions that were related to the cloud ecosystem and like everything that we're talking about in terms of DevOps was implicated because of some of the issues that they had discovered with the SolarWinds hack. So in December 2020, a cybersecurity firm called FireEye, who is a customer of SolarWinds, noticed that some of their proprietary software was being used elsewhere. And when they dug into it, they had noticed that it was because of a hack that occurred with the SolarWinds distribution that had gotten out. And when they looked into it further, they noticed that it actually impacted over 18,000 customers, including large government bodies like NASA, the Department of Homeland Security, Microsoft, FireEye, of course, and their customers as well. And we'll actually go over a little bit of what exactly happened in that process, but it's always really interesting to kind of see it from that perspective of, well, CI/CD is this process that helps us to get from point A to point B. So how exactly did it get us from point A to point B, but with all of these issues, right? And with holes essentially in the process. And so this session is going to cover a little bit of some of the things that you can start to do or implement into your CI/CD process to help prevent incidents like this. And like I said, I think it's really timely because nowadays data breaches and malicious hardware hacks occur all the time, and it really can cause a lot of issues for your organization, whether it's a startup or an entity or a vendor, whatever it happens to be. There's actually a lot of studies that are showcasing the impacts of data breaches and just the cost of software failures in general. This is actually this data here is pulled from 2 surveys. So in one survey, they looked at the cost of data breaches that occurred in 2017. And what they found was that it resulted in a total of $1.7 trillion in financial losses. And that impacted over 3.6 billion people. And the thing about finding software issues after the fact is that it does cost a lot to fix it, right? And so on average, nowadays, it costs $4 million to correct data breaches in the space. And that lines up with a lot of what we know today, right? The reasoning behind why we choose to work in a DevOps manner, why we choose to try to shift left and find more vulnerabilities or potential mistakes earlier on in the process, right? Because if we do find these mistakes later on in the process, it just gets exponentially more expensive to fix, right? And this was from data that they had collected on the cost of recovering from vulnerabilities. And you can tell that when you're in the design or development phase, it's not as risky, or it's not as costly in terms of effort and time and money to fix compared to when you get further down in that development lifecycle and you've deployed something already. It becomes a lot harder to take it back, right? And we saw that in the case of SolarWinds, and even today, people are reconsidering what tool chains they're using because of that. So that kind of sets the foundation for this conversation around CI/CD governance. And when we automate governance, it's really about how we can attest to the integrity of assets in the delivery pipeline. So whether it's your code base or your container image, how do we ensure that this artifact that we have, this code that's ready to be deployed, right? Our solution that's ready to go out there to our customers, that it works the way that we expect it to. And it doesn't have potential loopholes or potential data breach quality type mistakes, right? So that's what CI/CD governance is about. And so in this session, I want to go over some of the more foundational things about this process. So I want to go over, what is CI/CD? If you're not familiar with CI/CD, how can you start applying principles of governance to, your architecture and your delivery processes? And so we'll end with practices and tooling. I'm just checking chat in case anyone has any questions, but I don't think that we do. And feel free to ask any questions along the way. I'm more than happy to answer them as we go along. So I'm going to start on this section about CI/CD because I think it's really important to kind of share exactly what are the components of CI/CD, so that way we can actually look at each of these stages that we progress our code into and see and really dissect it, right? And figure out, well, where is the potential for us to be able to capture some of these vulnerabilities earlier on? And so the best way to describe a CI/CD pipeline is that it takes all of our code changes and releases out to the hands of our users and customers. So it's essentially taking all of our ideas, our feature requests, our changes, and it's bringing them across to different phases of the delivery lifecycle, and then eventually knowing that after we've tested things, after we've built them, packaged them, verified them again, that we can get them out into production, get them out into the customer's hands, and that it works the way that we intend for it to. So that's the process of CI and CD. And so if we break down the term CI and CD, it actually consists of two practices that we should think about. And the first one is continuous integration. And continuous integration is all about integrating our code changes into this artifact that we think can run on the server. So that artifact can be a container image, it can be a WAR file, it can be a jar file. It's this packaged artifact that has all the dependencies built in. It's run some unit tests. We know that it can be compiled or interpreted. And that works the way that we expect it to. And so we can boost this process, right? We can add things like vulnerability scanning and so on and so forth into the process. We can also figure out how we want to version changes and which changes are going to be release candidates potentially. But the CI process is really about taking this code and integrating it on a regular basis, right? And we have this process that's automated. And so if we do want to take our artifact, right, our code, and run it on a different machine, or put it out there for our customers, we can do that. And that's what CI is doing. It's essentially taking all of our developer workflows. And from that process, once we have that artifact, then that's when we can actually begin to do continuous delivery. And when we talk about continuous delivery, it's really about ensuring that we can get these pieces out in a repeatable and safe manner. So, if we're going to get code changes out, we need infrastructure that it runs on, right? And so that can involve our cloud stacks, that can involve Kubernetes environments, that sometimes involves provisioning infrastructure, right? And ensuring that it has everything, it's configured the way that we need it to. We need it to be configured so that it can run our applications. And then there's also this process of managing change, releasing software, verifying it, and rolling back or managing the incident if there is anything that does go wrong, right? And so this entire kind of ecosystem that we build around this process is what we call continuous delivery, right? And the nice thing about continuous delivery and continuous integration is that when these two processes come together, it really does enable DevOps, which is our way of delivering business value. And so we can do things like report on our performance. So how often are changes being released, right? Our deployment frequency, change failure rate, mean time to recover, that sort of thing. Lead time to production, right? We can capture all of those metrics, those DevOps metrics, and better understand the health of our delivery and how well our teams are performing. And similarly, right, we can do things like auditing, we can secure secrets across our platform, and so on and so forth. And so there's, I think nowadays, a lot more push around this area, and a lot more companies focusing on CI/CD. And so you'll see a lot of different solutions like Arco CD, Tecton, Harness is there, GitLab, etc. In this space that's helping people really deliver their workloads, no matter what they have, no matter what architecture, right? Whether you're deploying to bare metal, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, it doesn't matter if you're working with microservices. We're really trying to simplify that process all around. And so that's my spiel on CI/CD. I wanted to cover that base, right? To give you a better understanding of the different components that are related to delivering software. And it's no different from the steps that you would take on a manual process or without CI/CD. But CI/CD enables us to automate that process, right? So that we can repeat this process across different teams. We can start creating templates and doing setting up repeatable methods for delivery. And so that's where governance can also play a part in this process as well, because once we start applying a lot of these governance principles, then we can start automating governance and not just delivering things for the sake of delivering things, or, oh, wow, we released something very quickly, but it didn't work the way that we wanted to, or it caused this issue. And so governance tries to help with that. And so by no means does it have to be this thing where we're applying governance principles means that you're slowing down, but that's why we want to introduce this as automated governance, and not just this manual process that people have to dig into to be able to understand, well, how do I ensure that the next release that I do it doesn't cause a data breach, or doesn't result in a hack. So do we have any questions? Nope. Cool. Great. So I'll jump into this section, and remember, if you have any questions, if I'm speaking too fast, let me know. I'm more than happy to answer any questions and just talk about any topics. But we are going to go cover a couple more principles around governance, and then that's when we'll jump into the actual tools and practices that I want to talk about that you can apply no matter what kind of CI/CD solution you're using or what your CI/CD process looks like today. So I think when we talk about governance, there's a lot of questions about what exactly falls under that term. And I think in IT governance particularly, it's a little bit different from the typical sense of governance. And really, when we talk about when we talk about IT governance, we're talking about three things. We're talking about the term governance, risk, and compliance. So that spells out that is GRC, that's abbreviated. And so when we talk about governance, this is about standards. So this is also about expecting the unexpected. So when you have any government system, like for example in the US, right? We have a government, so we have a method for dealing with state of emergencies. Like for example, if a hurricane or a forest fire starts, we know exactly who gets notified, right? We have systems in place to notify people if there are any issues. There are shelters in place that get started up. People know if they have to make an announcement, or they have to speak to certain events, or maybe that they're in the case that there is a lot of destruction in a particular state or particular area, that there are organizations or nonprofits that can support, any businesses or individuals that have been displaced, right? And so in that sense of the word, it's the same in our tech teams. Governance is about expecting the unexpected. It's about having the communication channels when things do go wrong. And it's also about ensuring that we have those systems. So if we don't have those systems, investing into them, right? Setting up the infrastructure to be able to do that. If we don't have chat ops, maybe looking into that. And so it is it is playing a little bit in the future, right? Because you're overseeing the achievement of governance for the future. And so all of these kind of parts of governance are always evolving, right? And when we talk about governance, when we talk about risk, when we talk about compliance, it's attached to what's going on in the real world oftentimes. And so expecting the unexpected is a little bit challenging. And that's why we have to continually have these systems that are in place that will help make that process or that transition into any new standards or any new expectations easier. So I want to go over risk as well. And risk is about security, right? It's about being able to ensure that, well, if someone leaves an exposed secret in a GitHub repository, that's a risk, and people know that that's a risk, right? And you can have different ratings or different prioritizations of risks. So you can have things that are very high level risks, very low level risks. But being able to set up systems and have systems to identify those risks and report on them so that people can take action on them is the second part of GRC. are there standards organizations, or are these things typically per company? So I think that there are, we'll talk about this when we get to compliance, around certain standards that are enforced on industries. Like for example, the healthcare industry, right? We have government entities or bodies of people who set these rules on our organizations or on companies to ensure that they're not abusing anything that they shouldn't be abusing, right? But there are also standards that organizations set because, well, they want to comply to something, or they just want to have this certain bar of quality. And you know, those standards can be strict depending on your industry. It can also be based on your company size. Like for example, maybe a startup, for them, you know, a really big standard is that they don't want a lot of people to have access into their production environments because or their specific AWS instances, because they don't want to end up with a really large bill at the end of the month that they can't pay for, because that could sink their business. So some of the standards are set by security teams, governance teams, right? Or even cloud teams. They're set at a very high level or board level. Other times, these standards are set by government bodies, entities, and so we comply to them. And that's what compliance is about too. It's meeting certain expectations that we've set and also being able to prove that we meet them. So documenting those processes, having logs of how things changed and how that resulted into specific changes is really important. And the reason why I mentioned documentation and logging and having records of change is because for the SolarWinds hack in particular, they didn't know how to take action after they realized that there was a hack. And so it was this big investigation of figuring out, well, who was at fault here, or what exactly happened. And since they didn't have a record of who deployed what, when, where, and why, and what resulted into this situation, they had a harder time explaining these results. And so for some organizations, if you don't meet specific expectations, they shut you down, right? Just like in the food truck industry, if you don't meet certain expectations around cleanliness and practice, they'll shut down your business. And so it's the same thing for a lot of these, for certain organizations in healthcare, even finance. And again, like I mentioned, that some of these rules or some of these expectations change over time, right? For example, our expectations around vaccines have changed in the past year because of some of the incidents that have happened. And so I'm sure in the next, I mean, if it hasn't even happened already, our expectations for vaccines and the standards for vaccines is probably going to be different, right? And so it's the same way in tech, you know, with GDPR, security rules, data rules, how we use sensitive information, all of that will change. And so being able to manage this kind of GRC process, governance process, is about building these systems so that we can reach those expectations. And this is also great, you know, too, for a lot of organizations that want to get compliance because they want to sell, for example, into the federal business, right? Getting FedRAMP certified is a big deal. And so there are certain things here that can be really beneficial. Will the process be defined by ITIL standards, or will it be something else? Yeah, it depends. Great question, Jed. It depends on what exactly you're trying to conform to in terms of standards. I think for every industry, they kind of pick and choose. I know for harness, like we're ISO compliant, and then this is all I know about compliance. I'm at least tech compliance, right? ISO compliant. So you meet certain specific standards that are met by government bodies, but it really depends on those bodies. They're the ones that define it. Yeah. Thanks. Awesome. So, well, let's just recap since we covered some more about IT governance, right? GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. And really, if you take all these three things together and bundle it up, it's about how organizations monitor and control IT capabilities and decisions for the delivery of value to key stakeholders. And so I really want to highlight these two aspects of being able to control and monitor what's going on in your delivery process, and how does that impact your organization. So I really, now that we're kind of getting into this area of practices and tooling and implementation, I really do want to focus on these two areas because I think a lot of these practices will provide either one or both of these things. And so I actually broke it down based off of different phases that you have within the software development lifecycle. So I hope this is helpful for anyone who maybe only controls a certain part of the process, right? If you're a developer, maybe you're not the person who can, make decisions on what IT operations does, or how do you, oh, Wi-Fi issues? Oh, awesome, cool. Let me know if I'm breaking up as well. I can, oh, awesome, cool, I'm good. Sweet, thanks. Just let me know if I'm breaking up at any time. I can just pick up where I left off. But I broke this out into different phases because I think that there are different people here. So you may only be able to, make decisions in the development kind of workflows versus operations workflows, or maybe, you work in DevOps and so you don't get a say in, you don't get too much of a say in how developers code or what their CI process is like. I don't know what it's like at your organization. It's different everywhere. But that's why I broke this down into separate phases. I had a question here. Do you natively support dependency checks, static code analysis, or do you integrate with external tools? Yeah, so we integrate with external tools, and often that's what usually happens with CI processes. I don't know of any CI tools that will natively support or do the dependency checks or static code analysis. So actually, I think based off of like what I've been kind of reading around in the space, I think there is a more of a shift to building out CI capabilities so that you can get better analysis into your testing coverage and capabilities. But I haven't heard of any organizations or startups or solutions that are supporting dependency checks or static code analysis. Yeah. It'll be interesting though. There are a lot of static code analysis vendors and tool providers, open source solutions, that work really well, like SonarQube, and there are so many container scanner solutions as well that are open source, and it would be really amazing to see the community move in that direction too, especially as a lot of these solutions are, a lot of existing solutions are now considering what it's like to automate particular workflows, right? And so, I mean, static code analysis is a really big one. That's a really good question, Deepak. I mean, that's something I'm thinking about as well. So in this build phase, there's a couple of different things that you can do, right, to really secure and ensure that you have the quality gates that you need, right? And really, I think implementing many or some of these will provide a lot of insights into where exactly your code base is at, right? So a really simple tool that you could leverage is SonarQube, for example, and that's the screenshot here that does static code analysis on your code base, and it reports things like code smells, potential vulnerabilities, potential bugs. And it also, if you hook it up to your testing suite, it'll tell you your coverage. So it'll give you coverage reports. And it's really nice because it goes back to what we were saying, right? That monitor and control piece of it is that, well, if you don't meet a certain criteria or meet a certain standard of code quality or dependency or security, then you can basically fail this part of the pipeline, right? Your CI pipeline can basically fail, and you can set that as a quality gate. And so that's one of the nice things that gets you introduced into governance, and automated governance in particular, is because you're now creating these attestations for the integrity of your code. And so if it doesn't pass that test, you automatically fail it. And that's where we want to get to at the end of the day. I'll also share a really nice statistic here that showed that the majority of applications in the enterprise market today leverages open source software. And so it's really common to use libraries, third-party libraries, any solutions, any particular runtimes or libraries or frameworks that we enjoy. But just know that over more than 4,000 security vulnerabilities are discovered in open source projects a year. And so this goes back to saying that you don't know, it's often not just your code that you have to be careful of, but also the dependencies. And so implementing things like dependency checks, container scanning will start really getting at the point of being able to kind of cover your all of your bases, right? So I think that's just something that I wanted to leave you all with to consider. And I think that's sometimes something that's really overlooked, because people are saying, well, we know we're having all of these great coding practices, but then they don't realize that it may be another project that they're using, or a third-party library that they're using, that's not using all of these great practices that your team is. Yep. Awesome. So this part of, so I actually wanted to, we got a link in the chat as well that talks about recent issues on this topic specifically. I'll have to check that out. I actually had screenshotted a Microsoft blog post that had analyzed the SolarWinds hack and exactly what had happened in this process. And this is a screenshot, so it might be a little hard to read. You can ignore the text. I can explain what happened. Basically, the attacker had injected code into one library of the SolarWinds Orion code base. And what they did was they introduced a backdoor that would send information out to the attackers. And so the way that they had gained access into the code base was through an exposed secret in a GitHub repository. And what they found was, like, this code was just injected. So on the bottom, you have this original function, and then you'll see here that someone had initialized a thread that had exposed the backdoor and would release out information. And so that's also another thing that could have been prevented by simply securing that secret in that GitHub repository, and also doing a little bit more around the CI and CD process about understanding the changes, right? So if we had someone who was manually reviewing that code, if they had done like a PR, they had seen like a change log of code, someone might have been able to point out that, hey, this looks really suspicious, or this is not our original code, right? And maybe would have been able to prevent the SolarWinds hack. So it's just something that's kind of interesting. I thought it was cool that they had actually figured out and actually screenshotted certain parts of the code and said, like, this is exactly how they did it. I actually linked out to the blog on the bottom here, and I can share a link to this presentation as well in case you want to read more into it, because I think it's actually pretty interesting. And as someone who doesn't come from I wasn't a security engineer, so I don't have the security background. It's always really interesting to continually learn everything from all the findings that the security community is sharing with us, because I think it is a really great community. And even in terms of what we have today, the infrastructure solution or the security solutions that we have today, HTTPS, RSA, encryption. Those were all from the NSA community, the security community. And so it really, it is really a great community to follow and lots of learnings. Great. So yeah, I have this image that shows that application secrets actually live everywhere, not just in your GitHub repositories, not just in your CI servers, but in your infrastructure when you're provisioning things, in your artifact repository, and in your actual application runtime, you're using application secrets, right? And so it's actually also pretty interesting to figure out who has access to all of these kind of systems that we have right in place. Who has access to production? Do they need access to production? And so this is getting at who has access to what. This is control management, right? This is authorization on authentication. Right. And so a lot of CI/CD solutions nowadays allow you to really control things at a resource level. So, who is able to create, update, delete, read, execute pipelines, and for what environments, right? What different instances do we report on these things, right? Who's allowed to create new accounts, user accounts? Who's allowed to create new applications, CI/CD pipelines for certain applications? So you have all of these kind of components, right, related to software delivery, your actual application, your infrastructure, your pipelines, any workflows that make up that pipeline, any particular deployments that you want to define. There's so many aspects to it, especially when we work with cloud, that we have to really consider like who has access to certain actions and permissions to certain environments. So something that was also interesting was that this wasn't secured for the SolarWinds organization. They had a bunch of pretty much anyone had access to multiple things. And when it came down to asking, well, whose fault was it? They had blamed an intern. And the question was, well, why did the intern have access to a lot of these environments, or what is going on? And one of the things that they had done, SolarWinds had done in response to the hack, was say that they reconsidered who had access to what. And this is a great action item to take, as someone who is thinking about these things. What happens when someone leaves a team and joins another team? Should they still have access to your team's application? So, and the answer should be no, right? So is there a clean process for this as well? We're getting pretty far down into the software delivery lifecycle here, and as we go further down, you may not have as much access, or maybe you do start having more of a say in how your organization sets up these practices and tools, right? And so in this process, we're talking about how can we produce better tests, essentially, right? And maybe a lot about testing, maybe you don't. But I always want to think about it in terms of white box testing and black box testing, right? And in black box testing, you actually don't know the internals of the code. You're testing for functionality. You're testing things for integration. And then in white box unit testing, that gives you the assumption that you can look into the code and test things and ensure that things work the way that you expect them to. And so there's kind of two kind of schools of testing in that sense, right? And so you want to focus on those two areas and ensure that you actually do have tests and that you're using them in your CI/CD process. There's so many times when I've looked at a CI pipeline and because the developers want to just get code out there quickly, they turn off tests and they say, well, we'll get back to fixing our unit tests, or we'll get back to fixing up our our testing suite. But for right now, we can't get things out because it's not passing all the tests, so we're just going to cancel it. You're essentially saying, well, your CI/CD pipeline really is just an open pipeline now, so anything can go through it, right? And that's not how we want to handle CI as a process. Yeah. There's a comment from John that says, seems like there's an overlap with HR type responsibilities and engineering in regards to who has access issues. Must be challenging to integrate. Definitely. I mean, I definitely think so. I've seen in larger organizations, people will have dedicated security teams that will do these audits and will say like, hey, we noticed that so-and-so has access, should they be having access? Asking some of these more difficult questions to actual development teams or cross-functional delivery teams, like, who should have access to this? Should they be notified? That kind of thing. And I think it is, and the larger your organization is, the more complexity you have naturally, right? And how do you even define those lines when you're working in microservices architectures, right? And that's why I think it has to be so important that a lot of these access control rights can be controlled in a centralized platform. Yeah. So the question is, isn't that addressed by IAM solutions like Okta? Sometimes, yeah. A lot of times too, in CI/CD solutions, you can use role-based access control and SSO, right, to create those user groups and define exactly who should act, who are your administrators, right? Who are the people who can create pipelines? In some cases for organizations, one team creates all the pipelines. And so if you want to onboard a new application, you have to request it, right? Shouldn't a GRC system be doing audits on those? Yeah, definitely. And oftentimes too, I think there's going to be this push in CI/CD platforms to also be a conduit for a lot of the audits, right? Because you essentially have that access. You are that foundation essentially for all this information, right? A lot of our CI/CD pipelines and solutions and tools, they have access to when we deployed something, right? So why not be an audit or be a system to be able to track like who has access, and is that still up to date with your actual organizations and employee records, that sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, there have been a lot of people within like the open source community asking solutions from Tecton, Argo, etc., to be able to support being able to leverage SSO, being able to leverage some of the kind of HR things that you've already set up in systems, to be able to import that into their system, their CI/CD solutions, and use that. So your organizational structure is a function of who has access to what. Yeah. And this is just some examples of how people can start to define exactly what kinds of governance practices they want to, or standards that they want to achieve in their organizations. So this example actually comes from a white paper on automated governance by John Willis. I think if you search it up, automated governance, IT revolution, John Willis, you'll find the reference architecture. But he shares, along with some other experts, some of the things that they're doing in the space to improve on automated governance. And one of the things that they had done as a exercise at different organizations like Capital One was they defined the control that they wanted to have within their CI/CD process, and then the actual test, and they call it an attestation for, it's basically the success that needs to happen for a artifact to move on to the next stage. And so they set a couple of these controls and define them in their CI/CD process. And so as a part of their CI pipeline, they said, well, we want to introduce unit tests as a control, and the attestation is that all tests must be executed and all tests must pass. And that was their rule, and they did this across their entire pipeline. And so they also said, well, we want clean dependencies. So all dependencies in this build that belongs in our CI pipeline has to be free of any known security defects. And we'll go over a little bit more about Capital One and what they're doing. I do want to get closer to the end here, since we're almost at the top of the hour. But this is the last kind of section that I wanted to go over, and this is around deploying applications. So we're now in this stage where we are provisioning, configuring, and delivering, right? And so in this process, you want to do a couple of things, right? Since you have your applications now, you know, you have, well, now, since you have your architecture now, you can start to do more end-to-end tests with your applications. So you can start doing penetration testing. You can do, you know, load tests. You can do vulnerability scanning against, you know, your infrastructure as well. And so you can do a whole host of things, both on the app side and on the infrastructure side. And you know, there's a lot of great things here and practices that people have shared in the past. So, you know, things like outdated server configurations is one thing that sometimes leads to vulnerabilities. There's, you know, passwords that are left as admin123, right? And so there's a lot of things that you can do to defend your systems as well. And so sometimes it's not just in the app side, but also on the infrastructure side that you can take care of certain things if you're not already doing that. This was something that I had mentioned earlier shortly, was just this process of being able to have like a change control board to do manual approvals, or that manual check, that human kind of centric check to say, well, this is exactly what we want. And now we can release it out we can deploy it out to production, right? So this is just one example, and you can have a change control board at different levels, right? I mentioned that a change control board at the development stage could have been really nice, like when you're doing a pull request, right? Having a change control board would have been really nice in the sense of, well, they could have maybe noticed the malicious code hack that had occurred, right? Or maybe if it happened right after the CI process and they had a break and there was a control advisory board that had taken a look at the packaged artifact and had seen some of the code changes and would have known. There's also a couple other things too that are kind of related to this, but I mentioned like change logs of configurations, change logs of code. You know, this exists. This is a screenshot of Harness, but it shows certain configurations being changed in an application service. So here in this change, you notice that we actually deleted some configuration variables, and you can get a log of that. This is a audit trail that shows like exactly what got changed within the platform. So if I, you know, did a deployment, or if I updated a Lambda serverless specification, it shows that here. And it's really great because it shows who did it, when they did it, what part, you know, what resource exactly did they change. And so this is just one example of how a lot of organizations now are starting to kind of capture this and provide this for people who are using CI/CD. So that gets to the end of my presentation here. You know, you may be asking like, who's using this, who's doing this? I mentioned that Capital One had done some work around this, and they actually had 16 kind of control gates that they had produced in their CI/CD process. And this is a screenshot of everything that they use. So they have, you know, integration testing, performance testing, and these are all things that you can do regardless of your CI/CD process, right? Regardless of what tools you end up using. They do things like feature flag management as well, automated rollback. But that's just something to consider here, is just like having a list of those controls that you want to implement or that you can implement. You got to start somewhere. You know, obviously don't need to have all of these if it doesn't make sense, but this is just one example. I mentioned this, John Willis has a white paper on automated pipeline governance, which is a great resource if you're really trying to break down some of the a deeper level understanding of what it means to have a automated governance process. I got a comment here. I like the idea of dynamically issuing a real-time identity for each CI workflow running on external worker fleet, some sort of Salmon agent running in worker fleet, which can complete daemon agent. Oh, some sort of daemon agent in worker fleet, which can complete off. Yeah, I know. I definitely think that for CI/CD solutions, it's just you've got to play that integrations game, right? If you're in the business of saying, well, you have to use, this solution, it just doesn't work. There's already so many teams that have enrolled their own solutions, have the tech stack that they have, and it's not changing. And so I think that's the role that a lot of CI/CD solutions are having nowadays. Yeah. I actually have just one slide left, and it's this one, right? And it's about being able. This session was all about controlling, understanding, and mitigating risks, and also knowing like you can automate this process, and so many times I think it feels bad for development teams and DevOps teams to have a lot of these questions or have a lot of these rules placed on them or expectations placed on them through, a governance team or through an entity. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be this kind of commandeering or very slow process. We can actually get there, and we can get there through CI/CD. So I hope this session was really helpful in that. I hope you can use some of the tips here, some of the practices to improve what you have today. Thanks for joining me. I'll also say I enjoyed these kinds of conversations. I enjoy also writing about DevOps, cloud, CI/CD. So I am socially everywhere at Tiffany Jakja. Can also reach out to me at Harness if you want to ask about this presentation specifically, or reach out for whatever reason. Totally here. Enjoy it. But thanks all.
Thank you, Tiffany. That was great. Are there any other questions for Tiffany? Tony, oh my gosh, I wish we were all meeting in person. Any other questions anyone wants to ask, or anyone want to come on camera and say hi? This actually felt almost like a normal, the most normal of all the meetups we've run virtually. This one felt, I said that in like Yoda speak, sorry. It's been a long day.
It's okay. At least I didn't do anything not normal.
No, it just had it kind of had the vibe of a meetup, or maybe it just had a fun vibe compared to all of the very serious meetings I've been in recently. So yeah, Jordan says thank you, and so does Jed. Yeah, thank you, Tiffany and Robert. One of the best sessions so far. See ya.
Wow, that's such a big compliment. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate it. Anything else from anyone? And everybody got their DoorDash gift certificate, right? Thank you, Apsani, for doing that. I don't know if we still have Cassidy with us here, but she will continue to shower the goodness on us from wherever.
Yeah, and if we don't have any questions, if everybody wants to go ahead and unmute yourselves and go ahead and give Tiffany a round of applause, because I think she's definitely earned it this time. Don't be shy.
Yes.
Thanks.